If you're looking to upgrade the audio in your 2016 to 2023 non-amplified Toyota Tacoma, these are going to be the kits for you. Hey everybody, Brian here with TrailGrid Pro. I've got some awesome new updated 5-channel plug-and-play amplifier and subwoofer kits specifically designed for your 2016 to 2023 non-amplified Toyota Tacoma. If you've been looking to upgrade the audio, we all know that the Tacoma is severely lacking from the factory, and adding an aftermarket amplifier to either your aftermarket head unit and or aftermarket speakers is definitely the way to go if you're looking for more out of your Tacoma's audio performance. We've partnered with some of the top names in car audio to bring you a completely plug-and-play solution that you can easily install in your own driveway or garage with our written installation guides and the aid of this video. We're going to have a few options on how you can order all of these parts for your Tacoma available in the shop at trailgridpro.com. So one of those options is going to be the amplifier and all of the amplifier wiring. So all of the harnessing and the power and ground and everything you need to just connect your 5-channel amplifier to your truck. If you want to take it one step further, we're also going to offer the amplifier kits with our custom-made subwoofer box. This 10-inch subwoofer enclosure was designed by the team here and is CNC cut here in our shop and hand assembled before it's finished and shipped out to you. This is going to drop in right behind the back seat and take place of one of your storage bins to give you an awesome amount of bass that's really going to help fill out your Tacoma. Now, as far as amplifier options, we're going to have 3 basic options. We have the Alpine S2A55V. This is a 5-channel amplifier. You can also order this kit with a kicker 5-channel amplifier. This is the CXA6605T. Again, a 5-channel amplifier, and these are going to fit perfectly right under the front passenger seat. And our newest addition to the lineup is the AudX V1K. This is a super powerful, super clean, and super low profile 5-channel amplifier option from AudX. We've started installing a few of these in other trucks, and they perform just as well or even sometimes better than the other counterparts of the names that you know and love. In any case, all 3 of these are going to be a massive upgrade over the non-amplified status that you had before. They're going to give you more power, a cleaner signal, and more adjustment and control over the EQ and the audio output in your Tacoma. So a couple minutes ago, I said this was completely plug and play. And the reason that it is plug and play is we have our harness here, again, from AudX. This is going to come with all of the adapters that you need. So if you have a 16 to 19 Tacoma, we have the vehicle-specific adapters for the head unit here. If you have 20 to 2023, we have a set of adapters there. We have RCA inputs to go into our amplifiers. If you're using an aftermarket head unit, we have RCA adapters so that you can run RCAs directly out of the head unit to the harness and down to your amplifier. If you order the kicker, we have a terminated end with forks. If you need wire ferrules, we have a terminated end with wire ferrules. You also get the power and ground cable, you get the fuse, you get the grounding bolt, zip ties, remote wire adapters. Anything and everything that you need to install these kits in your truck comes in the box when you order this off of TrailGrid Pro's website. We've even taken it one step further, and these have a bass control knob. So the Alpine has the AB2K bass control knob. The kicker has the KB2K bass control knob, and the AudX amplifier comes with the bass control knob. But our team has worked tirelessly to perfectly design these little bass knob control switch blanks so that you can use one of the spare switch blanks on the dash of your truck to mount your bass knob for a nice, clean, and easy install. Our Alpine 5-channel amplifier kit will also be available with the Alpine 10-inch subwoofer. This is a 4-ohm subwoofer that we've wired down to 2 ohms for maximum output and maximum clarity. If you order the Kicker 5-channel amplifier, we also have the same subwoofer enclosure available with a Kicker 10-inch subwoofer. Again, a 4-ohm subwoofer that we've wired down to 2 ohms, again, for maximum output and clarity. When you're browsing all of these amplifier kits in the store, you will notice one difference with the AudX kit. The AudX kit does include the amplifier mounting bracket. This will mount below the passenger front seat, and it uses the rear seat bolts to secure the bracket. The reason that we've included this with the AudX and then not with the Kicker or the Alpine is if you look at the profile, the AudX amplifier is a lot shorter than the Alpine or the Kicker amplifiers, and where this mounts, with it being all the way to the back of the seat, if you like to slide your seat back and forth a lot, where these amplifiers are mounted on this bracket, the substructure of the front passenger seat will actually make contact with the amplifier. So if you get this and you say, hey, I didn't get my amplifier mounting bracket, that was intentional. We don't want to damage the amplifiers, and I'll show you where to mount these. Just realize that the AudX amplifier bracket is really meant to go with the AudX amplifier and not the Kicker or the Alpine. But again, in this installation video, I'll show you exactly how to install these so that we don't have any problems with being able to move the seat back and forth. Now that we've talked about all of the awesome parts and accessories that you will get with these kits, let's go over some of the tools that you're going to need to complete your installation. Need some sort of ratchet, either powered or manual. Recommend an extension. You will need a 10, 12, and 14 millimeter socket. Having a wire fish or some sort of coat hanger is always handy. We'll need some panel tools, a pair of needle nose pliers, an assortment of Allen wrenches. Some of these Allen wrenches will come in the amplifier kits, so you will get a few there, but having a few extras laying around is not a bad idea. We have a number 1 and a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. We have a retractable razor blade and then a pair of side cutters. So not a lot of tools. Most of these tools you guys probably already have if you've been working on your Tacoma. So go ahead and grab those out, and we're going to jump into this truck and get it disassembled so we can get all these amplifiers and our subwoofer installed. Let's get started with the disassembly of our Tacoma. The first thing we're going to do is take out your head unit. This truck already had an Alpine, one of our Alpine plug-and-play bundles in it, so I went ahead and took the screen off. Depending on what head unit you have in there, may change up how you take this off, but if you have a factory head unit, really what you want to do for the first step is this whole trim bezel around your radio needs to come off. So to do that, just kind of get your fingers behind it, and you'll see that it just pops right off, and it's just held in with a bunch of tabs. So we're going to set that to the side, and now there are 4 10 millimeter bolts that we need to remove. So we're going to grab our 10 millimeter socket, and we'll get those out. All right, now that we have those removed, let's throw them in the cup holder so we can reuse them later. Now you can get your radio out. For simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and completely disconnect this radio and get it out of the way so that way we can kind of show you the install a little bit better. So depending on what you have going on in your dash, depends on what you need to disconnect, but let's just go ahead and we're going to remove all of these and just completely get this Alpine unit out of the way. So we have some factory connections, we've got some aftermarket connections. We'll get all this tidied up before we reinstall, but for right now, let's get all of this out of the way. Now that we've got our head unit out of the way, next thing we're going to work on removing are the kick panels, the door sills, the passenger seat, the rear door sill, and the rear cubby. So I'm going to set this on the bench and we'll move over to the kick panel. Next, we're going to remove this retainer here for the kick panel. You can just twist that counterclockwise and it will come right off. Then we need to remove the door sill. So to do that, you just get your fingers underneath. We're just going to pull straight up. And it's just going to pop right out. Now we can remove the kick panel. We're just going to release these two pins right here. We're going to get that out of the way. Next up is the passenger seat. So in this customer's truck, he has seat jackers installed, so this may look a little bit different than your truck. If you do not have these, you have four 14mm bolts that hold the seat directly to the floor. So you will use a 14mm socket to remove the front two seat bolts. You can then slide the seat forward and remove the two rear. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and take these bolts out of the seat jackers and essentially do the same thing. We're just going to leave the seat jackers installed for this video. All right, now with the two fronts out, we can slide the seat forward, and we're going to move to the back seat and remove the two rear seat bolts. Now for the rear seat bolts, we can remove these plastic covers. There we go. And those will just pop off. Now we can take out the two 14mm bolts in the rear. With the rear seat bolts out, we can now slide the seat back, tip it back, and release all of the wiring connections on the bottom of the seat. So here on the bottom of the seat, we have a few connections. This yellow one is a 2-action. So you're going to depress the white tab, slide the yellow collar up, and then depress the white tab again, and then that connector will come off. And then we're going to use our tool here to release this little hold down. There we go. So with our seat connections disconnected, now we can carefully lift our seat up and out of the truck. Next up, we're going to remove the rear sill plate. So to do that, again, just put your fingers underneath or use a pry tool. And that's going to pop up and out of the way. All right, our next step is we've folded the back seat down to get access to this passenger side cubby. We need to remove 3 10mm bolts, and then we're going to take this whole plastic cubby out. So we'll grab our 10mm and take out all 3. Set these to the side. Now that we have the 3 bolts out of our passenger side cubby, there's 3 more 10mm bolts that we're going to take out. Save those. Now, the reason that we're taking the driver's side panel out is because right here at the seam, this panel actually overlaps into the passenger side. So now what we can do is there's just a bunch of clips holding both of these panels in. So now we can start releasing all of the clips. And then this driver's side panel should be able to lift it up and out of the way. And then that will give us access to the one that we actually want to remove. So that will lift up and out of the way. Now we can replace the driver's side panel. So push it back into place, and then we can go ahead and re-secure it with the factory hardware. The next step in our disassembly is we need to remove the passenger rear seat back. So to do that, we're going to flip the seat up. And right here at the bottom, there is one 14mm bolt that holds in the bottom of the center seat belt. So we're going to grab our 14mm socket and remove the bolt. Now we have that removed, we can lay the seat back down. And we're going to remove these two covers. So these will just pop right off. And then underneath each of these covers is another 14mm bolt. So remove that one. Remove those. We're going to stick them in our storage cubby for right now. And now we can move around to the other side and we can pull the seat back out of the truck. Now that our seat back is out of the truck, we can now have enough room to get our new subwoofer enclosure in and behind the seat later on in the install. So you can grab your harness. The dash in the Tacoma is pretty tight, so a couple of recommendations here. If you can run it all the way through with everything connected, that works. Or if you want to lay this out on the bench or the floor or something, take a picture of it with your phone so that you can see how everything was connected by our production team, and then you can disconnect it, and that will make it a little bit easier to run through the dash. So that's what I'm going to do. So we're just going to disconnect everything from the radio end. So we're going to want that, all that connection, and then we also want, if you're going to install the bass knob, you want this 3.5mm headphone jack. It's labeled bass control. These are the wires that we want. We're going to run them up from under the glove box up to the dash, and then we can tuck the rest of our harness away. So to do that, I'm going to grab this wire fish. We'll get this extended out. Like I said, Toyota unfortunately didn't leave us a ton of room in the Tacoma to do this. So one trick that I have is, if you have some sort of work light, if you shine the work light up here under the dash, and then you can look down through the opening where the radio was and just kind of follow the light, get your wire fish down through the radio opening and into the passenger floorboard. That is the goal of this exercise. So let's give that a shot. All right, so we were able to get our wire fish through. Now we can take all of our connectors. We're going to grab some tape. We're going to tape it to the end of the wire fish and then gently pull it back through. Right. So we're going to pull with one hand, and then we're going to guide our wires with the other. Again, just take your time. right, so we were finally able to work our wires up. Took some time. If you feel any resistance or it's catching on anything, just take your time, keep working it. It will eventually make its way through. And now we can untape our wire fish because we don't need it anymore. All right. So now let's pull our slack on our base control knob. So before we get too much further, shine the light right here. So there's a switch blank right here on the dash. That's where we're going to put our base control knob. So what you can do is, if you have, I mean, I have pretty decent sized hands, you can reach right down there and you find that little switch blank, and there's 2 tabs on the back. You can just flick it out just like that. So we're going to remove that. We'll save the switch blank in case we need it. Now what we can do is we can take our base control knob and we're going to work it down. For right now, we can push the wire through, and we'll just go ahead and pull the slack out of it for right now. And then we'll install our base control knob here in a few moments. All right, now you can, according to your picture, you can reconnect your harnessing. All right, so now we have our harnessing reconnected. Now we can work on making our connections to our head unit. So I'm going to cut away to some segments on the workbench, and I'm going to cover each of the connections that you need to make depending on your vehicle and if you have a factory or an aftermarket head unit. In this segment of the video, I'm going to cover the connections from your amplifier main harness to your 2016 to 2019 Toyota Tacoma with a factory head unit. So on the harness that you receive from us, you will have this T-harness connected to the end. It has a 6 and 10 pin connector on both sides, and you'll notice that the blue remote wire is already connected for you. To connect this T-harness to your factory radio, you're going to remove the 6 and 10 pin connectors from the back of the head unit. Those will be male ends, so we're going to connect that into the female end of our T-harness, and then the male ends of our T-harness here will plug directly back into the factory head unit. And then we also have a grounding wire extension here that has a ring terminal on it. This will actually ground out the entire amplifier harness from the head unit down to the amplifier itself. So you can remove one of the screws that is on the side that holds the factory mounting bracket to the radio. Remove one of those screws, put the screw through the ring terminal, and then secure it to the back of the radio. And that will complete the connections to your factory head unit in a 2016 to 2019 Tacoma. In this segment, I'm going to cover how to connect your amplifier main harness to your 2016 to 2019 Toyota Tacoma with an aftermarket head unit. So when you receive the harness from us, you will have this T-harness that has 6 and 10 pin connectors, and then you will also receive these RCA adapters on the other end. These RCA connections on the amplifier harness will connect to your RCA pre-outs from your head unit. So these are nicely labeled. You have front, rear, and sub, and the front and rear do follow the white, gray, green, purple standardized radio color coding. So you have front left, front right, rear left, rear right, and then you have a sub left and a sub right. So that will get the signal from your head unit down to the amplifier. On the other side of the harness, we're going to use the 6 and 10 pin connectors. So you're going to disconnect the 6 and 10 pin connectors from the back of your radio or your harness that you're using to connect to the radio. The connectors from your truck are male, and they will plug into the female side of the T-harness, and then the male side of the T-harness will then connect back to your radio or your radio harness. You also notice that the remote wire is already connected. You can either leave it connected here, or if you have a remote wire on your radio harness, you can use the bullet connector here to connect directly to that. You also have a ground wire extension, so if you want to connect this, you just need to find a good ground location, a metal-to-metal contact, and then it has a supplied ring terminal on there that you can use to secure the ground wire that will ground the harness from the radio down to the amplifier. In this segment, I'm going to cover how to connect your amplifier main harness to your 2020 to 2023 Toyota Tacoma with a factory head unit. On the radio side of this harness, you have one 10-pin connector, so you're going to remove the black 10-pin connector from the back of your factory head unit. That will be the male end coming out of the dash, which will connect to the female end of your harness, and then the male connector here will plug directly back into the back of the radio. The next thing we need to do is connect our remote wire T-harness. So this actually piggybacks off of the AM/FM antenna. So on the other side of the radio, you'll find similar looking plug. You're going to disconnect your AM/FM antenna. Again, that will be a male connector coming out of the dash. We'll plug into the female connector of our T-harness. The other side of the T-harness will connect right back into the factory radio. And then you can see here that the remote wire is already connected to the harness. We've also supplied a ground wire with a ring terminal, so you can remove one of the screws that holds your mounting bracket into the factory radio. Just remove that, put the screw through the ring terminal, and then re-secure the ring terminal and the screw to the side of your factory head unit. In this segment, I'm going to cover how to connect our amplifier main harness to your 2020 to 2023 Toyota Tacoma with an aftermarket head unit. So on the amplifier main harness, you will have one 10-pin female connector. You will also have 3 RCA adapters. The RCA adapters will connect to the RCA pre-outs on your aftermarket head unit. They are labeled nicely, front, rear, and sub, and follow the white, gray, green, purple method. So you have front left, front right, rear left, rear right, and then a sub left and a sub right. So you can connect those to the RCAs from your head unit. We also need to disconnect the black 10-pin connector from the back of the radio or your radio harnessing. That will get connected directly into our T-harness. We will also be connecting our remote wire T-harness. This will piggyback off of your AM/FM antenna adapter. So find your AM/FM connection in your radio or your radio harness, disconnect it. That will plug into the female end, and then you can plug your T-harness back into your other adapter, and then you can see that the blue wire with a white stripe here is already connected. And then lastly, we have our ground wire. You can find a good ground location, a nice metal-to-metal contact, and then use the supplied ring terminal to secure your ground wire. And that is everything that we need to connect up behind the head unit. Before we can install our base control knob, if you opt to use the switch blank, I'm going to show you how to take the guts out of the base control knob and put it into the switch blank. All right, so to take the guts out of our base control knob, the first thing we need to do is remove the knob itself. So just pull that straight off. Now there's a little locking collar here. We're just going to take our needle nose pliers and just break that loose. Once you break it loose, you should be able to just spin it off with your fingers. We're going to hold on to that, and then as we flip the base control knob over, you can see this little cover on the back. That will just pop right off. And now we can push the guts of our base control knob out. Now we can grab our switch blank, and you'll notice that on the back of the switch blank there is a little recessed area that is going to line up with the little circuit board. So what we want to do is we're going to take the adjustment stem, we're going to put it through our switch blank, so that our circuit board is again lined up with that little recessed area. And then we can use our locking collar. And we're going to start that finger tight. And then we'll just use our pliers just to snug it up. Doesn't have to be super tight. And then the last thing we want to do is we're going to take the adjustment knob and turn it all the way to the left. That is going to be the lowest setting. And then on our knob itself, you'll see a little indicator triangle. We're going to line that up and push the knob back on. And then that way, when we install this in the truck, we know that if it's all the way to the left, that's low. And then when we rotate it all the way to the right, that's high. So we're going to put it back to the left. And then that way we know that when we install it, it's going to go this way in the truck. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll make the connections to our head unit and tidy up the dash. Before we install our head unit, we're going to install the base knob so that we can clean up this extra wire. So we just put the knob into our switch blank. So we just need to take the 3.5mm headphone jack and plug it into the back of our base knob. Again, we want to make sure we got that turned all the way to the left so that we know which way is up. And then we can reach in and we'll just pull the rest of the wire into the dash. And we get our base knob lined up into the switch blank. And get that locked in. So there we go. Now we have base control right here on the dash. Now we can work on connecting our head unit. So again, follow along in the portion of the video that pertains to your head unit. I'm going to grab the head unit that was in here and we'll get that installed. One consideration, if you have our Alpine plug and play head unit bundle, we've included a power ground and accessory pigtail here for you to use for a dash camera or other accessories. So we're actually going to use this for the grounding wire. So in our case, for this install, I'm going to clip off the ring terminal. And we're going to install a male bullet connector on the end of our amplifier ground wire. All right, so now I can ground our harness directly to the radio harness. And now this is a 2018 Tacoma that we're working in today. So again, your connections may look a little different. So the first thing we're going to do in this one is I need to grab my RCAs. And let's do the sub. All right, so our orange is going to be our sub left, our brown is going to be our sub right. Let's grab our rear. So we're going to go green to white and purple to red. And then we'll grab our front and we're going to go white to white and gray to red. So now we need to grab the other side of our T-harness. So from our T-harness, we're going to connect the 10 pin from the truck to our harness. There we go. And then we can connect the other side of our T-harness to the vehicle or your radio. All right. Now we have our amplifier harness connected. Now we just need to tidy up the rest of our vehicle connectors. So I'm going to do that real quick and then we'll put this radio back in the dash. This is also a good time to have good wire management because as you can see with an aftermarket head unit, there is a lot going on and we need to get it all back in the dash. So twist ties and zip ties are your friend. All right, I've got everything tucked back in the dash. I'm gonna put a couple of the factory head unit bolts back in just to hold the head unit in place. I'm not gonna fully button up the dash just quite yet until we get everything connected and give everything a test. But we'll just put 2 bolts in there just to hold the head unit so that it doesn't fall out. Now we can work on tidying up the rest of our amplifier wiring, and then we can start running some more wires here on the floorboard. Now we can tidy up the amplifier main harness. We're gonna run it along the plastic here. We're gonna tuck it up under, and then when we get to right about here, we can reach through the carpet and we're gonna pull it down here and come out where the factory seat wiring is. So to do this, even with these MOLLE panels on here, we can work that up. And then if you have a panel tool, that's also helpful. Pull the panel out and then work the harness in behind. It's a little bit easier without the MOLLE panels, but obviously it can be done. Oh, there we are. That is tucked up and out of the way. Now we want to work it down through this hole. So what we can do is actually reach under the carpet. If you pull the carpet down a little bit here, we can get just enough of an opening to run our harness through. So we now have our harness down here. Like I said, we're just going to work it up through there, and we can fix our carpet. So now we have our amplifier harness run. Next, we're going to run the ground wire. There is a factory ground screw right here under the seat, so that's what we need to make access to. So to do that, we can use our panel tool, and we're going to pop the carpet loose because we need to get under the carpet for this next step. And you're also going to need a 10mm socket. So as we lift the carpet up, so there is the factory ground that we're going to use for our ground wire that comes with your amplifier kit. So we're going to use a 10mm to take that off, and then we'll grab our ground wire and put the bolt back through the ring terminal in the ground wire. Grab our ground wire. We'll go ahead and fish the wire ferruled end through the same hole in our carpet. And now we'll grab our bolt that we just took out, put it through the ring terminal, get the rest of your wires that were in your factory ground, and we'll reinstall 10mm bolt. So there's our ground wire installed. We're now ready to install the subwoofer in our Tacoma. So if you ordered the AudX or the Alpine amplifier bundle, you are going to get this length of red and black speaker wire. This is what we're going to use to connect the subwoofer to the amplifier. If you ordered our kicker bundle, you will get this black and yellow wire. And then the reason there's 2 different ones is because they have different ends on them. So the AudX and the Alpine need wire ferrules on the amplifier end, and the kicker needs forks. So in this installation, we're going to be installing the subwoofer enclosure with an Alpine subwoofer in it. So we're going to be using the red and black, but again, the same principle is going to apply if you have kicker, if you're going to use the yellow and black. We'll toss this one to the side for now, and we'll grab our subwoofer and get it hooked up and in the truck. All right, so I have our 10-inch subwoofer enclosure. We have our sub wire. So we're going to start by connecting the wire to the enclosure. So for this, we need the bare wire ends. And you can see right here on the side of the sub box is the terminal cup. And on the terminal cup, you have a black and a red terminal. And these are screw terminals. So first thing we want to do is we want to twist them counterclockwise. And what that's going to do is open up a hole in the middle of the terminal. All right, there we are. And then you're going to match up. So in this case, the black goes to the black. So we're going to take our black wire and put the bare wire through the hole in the terminal, and then we can rotate this clockwise to tighten it up. So righty-tighty. There we are. We want to make sure we got good contact. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to match the red to the red. If you have the kicker kit, this will be yellow to red. So again, put the wire through, and then you're going to tighten down the terminal. Going for a metal to metal contact here. All right. So now we have that. Everything is nicely connected. We can now place our sub enclosure in the Tacoma. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab it and pull the wire up like this to keep it out of the way. We can now slide our sub box into the truck. We're going to slide our sub box in and all the way back up against the back wall of the truck. We can then take our wire and we're going to route it around and go under the plastic here by the door and down into the factory channel along the door. All right, so we're going to go around this bracket for the seat and down here by the plastic. Take the other end of our wire and we can use this factory channel here to route our wire. All right, now we have our wire through the channel here. We're just going to work it under the plastic. You can use a panel tool for this. Kind of pry up on the plastic and work it under. Or you can use it to carefully shove the wire underneath. There we are. And then we will keep running it up the front door sill and come out with the rest of our wires for our amplifier. Now that we have our wire run through here, we can put our door sill trim back on. So we'll just get that lined up. Smack it home. And now we're ready to put our seat back together. Now with our subwoofer installed, we can grab the seat back and put it back in the truck and get it bolted in. So let's grab it and set it in the truck. Make sure that we have our hinge plates on top of the seat. We can grab our 14mm bolts. And we're going to start these by hand. Make sure that we got the threads nice and lined up. Might have to apply some pressure on the seat to get the bolt started. Just make sure the holes are nice and lined up. And then we can grab our 14 mil and tighten these down. There we go. All right, there we are. We can grab our covers, pop our covers back on. Now we can flip our seat back up. And then lastly, we need to replace the seatbelt bolt. Get it started, and then we'll tighten it down. All right, there we are. Now that we have our sub wire up to the front here, we can go ahead and run it under the carpet just like we did the rest of our wiring. There we go. We got plenty of wire. So we'll end up tucking most of this away under the carpet when we get ready to tidy up the rest of our amplifier. So now we have our harness, we have our ground wire, and we have our subwoofer wire. Now it is time to jump up under the hood, and we're going to start running the power wire for our amplifier. Let's begin with the installation of our power wire. For that, we're going to need the included inline fuse, and then you have two sections of your power wire. You have a short pigtail with a ring terminal and a wire ferrule, and then a much longer piece. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start mocking up where we want to put our power wire. So to do that, we're going to use the Allen key, and we're going to loosen up the terminals or the set screws. Some of these might have a little piece of rubber in there. Go ahead and clear that out of the way. All right, we're going to take the one short end, and we're going to insert the wire ferrule into our fuse. We're going to get that wire ferrule pushed all the way in, and then we will tighten down the set screw. Get that nice and tight, make sure that's not going anywhere. And one end of our longer power wire we're going to insert in the other side of the fuse. All right, so there we go. We have power wire in the other side of the fuse, and then we can tighten down the set screw. All right, so there we go. Our power wire is connected. Now we have a couple of options before we put the plastic cover on for mounting the fuse in the truck. If you have someplace to mount it, this is kind of up to you, but there are a couple of holes in the bottom of the fuse plate. You can run a zip tie through there and attach them to the hold down bar of the battery. You can use some sort of double-sided tape or Velcro, or like I said, if you have some sort of other mounting solution for your fuses under your hood, you can do that as well. But I'm just going to go easy. I'm going to use the zip tie. So I'm going to go ahead and feed the zip tie up, and we're going to go through both of the holes. Go back down. Now we can grab our plastic cover, snap that back into place, and now we can start mocking up our power wire. We're going to eventually connect it to the positive terminal in the battery, but we need it to run along the fender, along the firewall, go through the firewall grommet on the passenger side, and then down to where the rest of our amplifier wiring is located. So we'll start mocking this up. I'm going to go with the battery hold down. So that will connect there, and then our power wire can run that way. So I'm going to go ahead and secure the zip tie. All right, now we have our short end of our power wire mocked up. We'll end up connecting it here to the battery terminal, but we're not going to connect it right now as we don't want this to be live wire quite yet until we get it connected to our amplifier. So now we're going to run the power wire. We're going to nicely tuck it behind everything, keep it close to the inside of the fender. We're going to use this main wire harness that runs across the back here to attach our power wire, and we're going to work it towards the firewall grommet over there. So let's run our power wire. And again, you can use some of the provided zip ties as needed for this. All right, now we've got a few zip ties holding our power wire. You can leave these loose at this point just in case we need to adjust the power wire a little bit. But now it's time to grab our knife and we're going to move down to the firewall and cut a hole through the firewall grommet so that we can run our power wire inside the cab. So what we're looking for is this big firewall grommet right here. So what I typically do is I use one of these little retractable knives, and we're going to make a little X cut here to the right of the main wiring harness. We're going to stay away from the main wiring harness, and then we're going to use this knife to cut through both layers. There's this outer layer, and then there's an inside layer of the firewall grommet, and then doing an X cut that will allow us to run the power wire through and still have a nice grommet. So start with the knife a little short. Just going to kind of plunge it through one way. Again, we're just going to make an X. Now that we have an X cut, we can extend our knife and repeat, making sure that we get all the way through the inner grommet. Now at this point, if you want to use a wire fish, you can do that, or sometimes if you get the hole cut nice, the wire ferrule end here will just go ahead and punch right on through. So we're going to go ahead and feed this through, and then once we get about 5 or 6 inches through, we should be able to see it popped out in the footwell, and then we can go ahead and pull the rest of it through from the inside. So we got it started. All right, so here we can see our power wire pop through. Go ahead and pull the rest of the slack. If it stops, let's make sure it's not caught on anything in the engine bay. All right, so we have plenty of power wire We can then tuck it behind here, and then we can grab our panel tool. We can release all of these two clips. Use those little factory hold downs, and then just like all the rest of our wires, we can run this up under the carpet with the rest of the stuff and come out right there. So now we have power, we have ground, we have subwoofer, we have our main amplifier harness. Now we are ready to start installing our amplifier and getting all of the connections made. First amplifier we're going to go over installing is the AudX amplifier. Again, this is the one that will work with the AudX amplifier mounting bracket. So on the AudX amp itself, you can see on one side it has nothing, and the other side it has a cover plate. This is where all of your control functions are, and then you have all of your wire connections. So when we mount this to the amp bracket, we're going to mount it in such a way that all of our control and our wires face forward. That way, if you have somebody in the back seat, you don't have to worry about them kicking the power and ground wires. So first thing we're going to do is mount the amp to the bracket. You'll have this little baggie of amplifier mounting screws. And in said baggie will be 5 of these bolts, 5 flat washers, 5 split washers, and 5 hex nuts. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of the bolts, we're going to go up from the bottom of the mounting bracket. So we're going to do a flat washer, a split washer, and then the hex nut. We'll get that started finger tight, and we'll do the same for all 4 corners. And you can see there's the mounting bracket that you receive will just be drilled out for your amplifier. So all 4 corners should match up perfectly. All right, there we go. We have them all started, and if you're asking me what is the 5th screw and washer and nut for, those are extra because we realize sometimes you drop these and they never come back. So we'll put those in the bag for a rainy day. And now that our amplifier is mounted, we can go around and just tighten everything up. All right, there we are. We have our amplifier mounted to the bracket. Now the next thing we need to do is we're going to remove with a number 1 Phillips these 4 tiny screws on our cover plate, so that after we get everything connected, we can tune our amplifier. These are definitely screws to be careful of. They are very tiny, and there are no extras of these provided in the kit. All right, so there's our control. So we'll go over that a little bit later, but right now let's work on getting everything connected. All right, so we have our amplifier main harness here. Really easy connections. You have an 8, a 4, and a 14 pin connector, and you have an 8, 4, and 14 pin connector. So all we're going to do is match these up, and these will just snap right into place. All right, so those are connected. Now we can connect our subwoofer wires. So we have a positive and negative, and then we also have a 12-volt power and the ground. And if you're asking me where is the remote, it is built into the harness for this AudX amplifier, so it's already included in that 4-pin connection. So what we're going to do, we're going to mock up where we're going to mount our amplifier, and that's going to go right here on the rear seat bolts. So when we put our seat back in, the seat flange will sit down on top of this, and then we're going to put our factory bolt all the way through, and that's going to clamp down the bracket here. And then so we're going to mock that up, and now we can make our connections here on the other side. Next thing we need to do is use the provided Allen key, and we're going to loosen the set screws on our subwoofer wire and our power and ground. Grab the other Allen wrench and loosen up the power and ground. All right, so let's start with our subwoofer wire. So we have positive and negative. So again, the red is going to go to the positive. So we're going to insert the wire ferrule all the way in, and then we can tighten down the set screw. And then the black, so we'll insert the black speaker wire into the negative. Tighten those down. Now we're going to do our power. Again, this is not connected to the battery right now. So we'll get our other Allen wrench, insert that wire ferrule all the way in there, and then tighten it down. And lastly, we have a ground wire. All right, there we are. All right, so now you can start tidying up your wire. You can tuck it away under the carpet. There's some pre-cut holes in the amp bracket. You can use that to zip tie things up, kind of however you prefer. So that is the connections on the AudX amplifier. Now we are ready to go up under the hood and actually connect the power wire to the battery so that we can give this a first test and power it up and make sure that we have all of our connections working. Now we're ready to install our Kicker 5-channel amplifier. Like I said, we're going to mount this further up this way, because if we were to mount the amplifier back here on that amp mounting bracket, when you slide the seat back, it is going to make contact with the amplifier, and obviously we don't want to damage our new amplifier. So we're going to mount it further up this way. So to do that, we are going to use this super sticky, super strong Velcro. So this will come in your kit, and we're just going to take a couple of these pieces here, and we're going to stick them to the bottom of our amplifier. Again, if you want to devise another solution, that works too, but this one works pretty well, especially after you get everything connected to the amplifier. Toyota's carpet is rather grabby with this Velcro. So install a couple pieces like that. Now we can go over making some of the connections. So I'm going to start with our RCAs. So here on one side of our amplifier, we have amp 1, amp 2, and subwoofer. So our amp 1, that is going to be our front channel, so front left and front right. Amp 2 is going to be our rear channels, so rear left and rear right. And then sub is going to be sub left and sub right. So if we grab our harness, and these are nicely labeled. So you have front channel, so FL channel 1. So we're going to go white into amp 1L, and then we're going to find our gray. So channel 2 is going to go in front right, so gray to red. And then we're going to go green to amp 2 left, purple to amp 2 right. And then on our subwoofer, we have sub left is your orange, so orange to white, and then the brown to red. So here is the other end of our ground wire. All right, so right here on our amplifier is this little screw. We're going to use a T10 Torx driver. And we're going to remove that screw. And then we can use it to put it through the ring terminal, and then we're going to secure it back into the amplifier. And we'll make sure that that stays nice and out of the way, because we need to use that base remote port right next to it as well. All right, so there we are. Speaking of base remote, if you're using the base control knob, you will have in your KB2K bag, there will be this 4-pin harness. This has both your remote and your base control knob on it. So if your kit came with just the single blue wire with a white stripe and you want to use the base control knob, just remove the single harness, add in this one that came with your base knob, and then our base knob is that 3.5mm jack. It's going to plug right into remote base. So click that into place, and then our blue remote wire will actually connect to the other side of the amplifier. So as we turn things around here, we can now go over the connections on the other side of the amplifier. So you have your ground, you have your remote, that's where our blue wire with the white stripe is going to go. You have your 12-volt power, that's your red power wire, and then you have your speaker inputs. So you have the front left, front right, rear left, rear right, and then you have sub positive and negative. So the best way to do this is we're going to grab our screwdriver and we're going to loosen up all of these set screws. These hold down little metal plates, which will hold down our forked connectors. We're going to loosen all those up. We're also going to loosen up all of the set screws with an Allen wrench. All right. So to make our connections, your speaker wires are also labeled, and again, white, gray, green, purple. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with the green and the purple, because if you start with the top, then you won't be able to get to the set screws for the bottom row. So we're going to start with channel 4, our purple, and then you'll notice there's a solid color wire and then the same color with a black stripe. So in this case you have purple and then purple with a black stripe. The black stripe wire also has a black ferrule, so that is the negative part of this channel. So the red is the positive, or the solid color is the positive, and the one with the black stripe and the black ferrule is the negative. So if we look on our amplifier, you have your negative and then your positive of each pair. So we'll go ahead and put the purple in place, and then we can tighten those down. And now we're going to find green. So that is right there, again labeled rear left, channel 3. Again, the black is going to be the negative. All right, there we go. All right, so there's the rear. Now we can do the front. So we'll do our gray. Again, positive and negative. You can see the reds. Red ferrules line up over the red, or the red forks line up over the red forks. And we'll do, last one is front left, that's our white. All right, there we are. All right, now we can grab our subwoofer wire. And again, well, in this case, the negative is going to be on the bottom, so we're going to do the black wire first. Tighten that one down. And then our yellow wire is going to go on top. All right. So that's speaker wires. The other thing we can start to do is we can start to mock up how we want to mount things so we can make sure that our wires are nice and out of the way. And we can also figure out how we're going to tidy everything up. So I'm going to keep most of the wires to the front of the amplifier here. All right, so we'll bring the power and ground from this side. All right, so we'll go with the inner one. That is your power. So get that all the way up in there. Again, power is going to go to the 12V slot. We can bring our remote wire around from our base control knob harness. And then last is our ground wire. Make sure our power and ground's nice and tight. So we have power, we have ground, we have remote, we have speaker in, we have speaker out. Now our amplifier is connected. Now we can figure out where we're going to mount it. We can tidy up our wires. And then we can use the Velcro to stick it down. And again, that's not really going to go anywhere. And then, like I said, we can use zip ties and we can clean all this up and make it nice and pretty. But once you have everything connected, it's now time to go up under the hood and connect the power wire to the battery so that we can power on our amplifier and check to make sure that everything is functioning. Now we're going to go over installing our Alpine 5-channel amplifier. So we have all of our wires here. We're going to mock up. We're going to mount the amplifier up here. Like I said at the beginning in the intro, if you mount it back here on the amplifier mounting bracket, when you slide the seat, it will make contact with the top of the amplifier, and obviously we don't want to damage our amplifier, so it will fit nicely tucked right up here behind this seat rail. So to do that, we're going to flip it over, and in your kit, you've got some of this super strong grabby Velcro. We're going to take a couple of pieces and stick it to the bottom of the amplifier. If you want to devise another mounting solution, that is completely fine. This is just one way to do it, and it works pretty well because the Toyota carpet is pretty grabby. All right, so couple of pieces of Velcro applied. Now we can go over making the connections to our amplifier. And then the way that we're going to mount this is the one side has all of the control functions. We're going to mount that here towards the outside. So it's a little bit more accessible depending on how you want to mount. I mean, it's fine to mount it whichever way. We just try to leave it where you can kind of get to the controls if needed, but once we set these and put the seat back in, it's kind of going to be a set it and forget it situation until you change something else out. But to start with our connections, we have our RCAs. So this is going to be the input side. So here we have channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, 4, and then sub and sub, and that will correspond with our RCAs. So white here is channel 1, so we're going to go white to white. And then gray is channel 2, so we're going to go gray to red directly underneath. And then green is channel 3, so we're going to go green to white. And then purple is channel 4, so we're going to go purple to red underneath. And then you have orange is labeled sub left, so we're going to go orange to white. And then brown to red. So that is all of the connections. And then we have our ground wire, and what we're going to do is there's a little tiny screw right there. It's Phillips head. We're going to use our screwdriver. We're going to remove that and then put it back through the ring terminal in the provided ground wire. This is going to ground out our harness to the amplifier. So take that little tiny screw out, put it through the ring terminal, and then we're going to carefully put it back in place. We'll get this angled over here so that we can still get to our dip switch. All right, there we are. There is that harness. Next up, we have our base remote. So if you opted to use the AB2K base control knob, this is the little harness that will come with your base knob. So what we want to use off of this is the telephone head or telephone jack port. And that's going to go over here to remote base control. And that's just going to click right in. And then the blue wire with a white stripe on the other side, that's a remote wire that will get connected to the other side of the amplifier. So as we spin this around, we're going to go over our speaker connections. So here we have, again, channel 1. So you have positive and negative, channel 2, positive, negative, 3, positive, negative, 4, positive, negative, and then your sub positive and negative. So on our harness, we have our little wire ferruled ends here. So we're going to start with all of the negatives, so then you can do negative and then positive. If you start with the positive, you will not be able to get to the set screw for the negative of that pair. First thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the supplied Allen key, and we're going to loosen up all of the set screws. So like I said, we're going to start with channel 1, so that's going to be white. We're going to go negative, so that's going to be the white with a black stripe. Also has the black wire ferrule end on it. So get that inserted all the way in. Get that tightened down, and then the solid white wire will go on top. Next up is gray, which is channel 2. So again, we'll start with the black striped wire, gray with the black stripe. Get that wire ferrule pushed all the way in there. All right, next up is green, channel 3. All right, and finally purple with a black stripe. And solid purple. All right, there we are. So quick recap: white, gray, green, purple across the top, white with the black, gray with the black, green with the black, purple with the black across the bottom. Now we can grab our subwoofer wire. So the black wire is going to go to the bottom. All right, next up we have our battery. So we'll grab our red power wire. I'll make sure this is nice and tight. A little wiggle. Now off of our base knob harness, we want to get the blue wire with the white stripe. That's our remote. That's going to go in REM. And last we have our ground cable. That's going to go in GND. All right, there we are. So now we have speaker wires, we have sub wires, we have power, ground, and remote. Now we can tidy up some of our wires a little bit. All right, so there we are. We have it stuck down. Now we can tidy up some of our wire. All right, there we are. Now we have everything connected and everything's tidied up. So now we can go back up under the hood and actually connect our power wire. That way we can fire up our amp and give everything a function test before we set the gains and EQ. So you have a couple options here. You can either use, this is a 10mm nut on the side here, or you can do the 12mm on top. I'm going to use the 10mm on the side. So we can loosen that up very carefully, hold on to it. All right, now sometimes when you connect the power wire to the battery, you will get a little bit of a spark. That is completely fine. We're not going to hurt anything that we've just installed. So we'll go ahead and baby spark there. So we have that on there, and then we're just going to tighten it down. All right, so that's nice and snug. We now have power. Now we can go put our head unit back together and give this a first try. Now that your power is hooked up to the battery, I've got our screen back on our radio. So whatever you need to do to get your radio ready to turn on, go ahead and do that. Go ahead and put the truck into accessory power. Our head unit's on, looking down at our amplifier. The amplifiers will have some sort of indicator light on them, whether like it's this Alpine or it has a blue light. You should also get some sort of light on the side, letting you know that the amplifier is on. All right, so we're going to, got my phone connected, pull up some music here. Kind of play it softly, but we do have sound coming out of the speakers, so that's a good sign that our head unit and our amplifier are connected properly. So let's get into your sound settings of whatever your head unit is, and we're going to go for fade and balance. And then what we want to do is we want to just drag this around. All right, so I hear it over here, front left, front right, rear right, and rear left. Now I'm going to just center it. So now we know that all of our RCAs and our speaker wires are connected correctly for each of the 4 channels, and then we will test our subwoofer. So again, the best way to do this, just find some music, and then you'll be able to know if your subwoofer is turned on when it starts playing. So now that we've done at least a basic function check, we know that everything is working as it should. Now we can, before we kind of button everything back up, we can go over tuning our amplifier to your vehicle. So we're going to jump over to the bench, and I'm going to go through all of the settings on all of these amplifiers and what they mean and how to adjust them so that you can tune your new amplifier to your audio setup. At this point in the installation, you have your amplifier installed in the truck. Everything is connected. You have your speaker wires, your power, your ground. We've done an initial test to make sure that everything is powering up as it should. Now it's time to start tuning our amplifiers and our head unit to maximize our new audio experience in our truck. So in this tabletop, I'm going to show you how to adjust all of the EQ and the dip switches and the gains and everything on all 3 amplifiers. So the first one that we're going to go over is the Alpine amplifier. So on the one side here where we plugged our RCAs in, you have your control settings. So we're going to go over these. Starting from the left, you have your turn on type. You can see that this is set to DC, REM, and then on the bottom it says high, low, low. We're going to leave this set to the right. So you take your screwdriver and just push the little dip switch all the way to the right for REM and also low. Moving across the RCAs, you have an input channel. So you can see that this has a 1-2 or 3-4 option. We're going to use this in a 4-channel configuration. So we want our dip switch set to 3-4. Directly below that, you have your sub dip switch for your input channel, and you can see that it's a 1+2+3+4 or sub. We're going to use this in the sub configuration. So again, we're going to move the dip switch to the right. So that's going to tell the amplifier that it is doing 4 channels for the speakers and it's using 1 channel for the subwoofer. Moving up to the top row here, you can see it's broken out into channels 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and then sub across the bottom. So we're going to start with channels 1 and 2. You have gain. Again, gain is just a measure of basically loudness, so that's where you're going to get your power out of the amplifier. And then you have a high pass filter. So a high pass filter is designed to cut out the lower frequencies. Again, we do not want sub bass coming out of our dash speakers or our tweeters, and conversely, we don't want the vocals or the words of the song coming out of our subwoofer. So our high pass filter is going to help limit the sub frequencies, the 50 to like 80, 100 hertz frequencies from playing out of the dash speakers. You're going to have the same thing for channels 3 and 4. So channels 3 and 4 are going to be your rear doors. And then you have the similar, and then for the sub you have a gain. You have a low pass filter. So a low pass filter, like I just said, is designed to cut out the higher frequencies. So you can see that the gauge here goes from 50 to 400. So 50 obviously being the very low end of sub bass. And then the last one is a bass EQ. We don't recommend using bass EQ Basically what this is going to do is artificially increase the bass output. It doesn't do it linearly, so generally we like to set the bass level with the gain and not the bass EQ. So for this, we're just going to make sure that it's all the way turned to the left or the lowest position. So now that we've gone over what the dials and the switches do, our general recommendation for tuning the amplifier is we want to send the amplifier the most amount of signal from our source unit or our head unit. So general rule of thumb is on whatever head unit you have in your vehicle, turn the volume of the head unit up to about 75% of its maximum volume. Then we can start adjusting the gains on the amplifier. I generally start with the front channel, adjust the gain, then do the rear channel, adjust the gain, and then do the sub by adjusting the gain to get overall loudness. Then we can start adjusting the high pass and the low pass filters. So for the high pass filters, generally we're gonna just kind of set this to, we can turn this. You can see it's got hard stops either way. We're gonna turn this to about 90 to 100. So anything lower than 90 to 100 hertz is going to get omitted and not played through that front channel. For the channels 3 and 4, your rear doors, we're going to do about the same. We're going to go about 100 on those, maybe a little closer to 120, as the rear doors usually are like a 6.5-inch speaker, so they're going to play a little less of the mid bass as compared to the front door speakers. And then on the subwoofer, we're going to set that to about 80 hertz. So anything above 80 hertz is not going to get played through the subwoofer. So again, these are just kind of recommended starting points for each of these settings. You can obviously tune these to your ear and how you like to listen to your music. So, you know, if you want a little bit more out of the rear doors, you can just turn the rear gain up a little bit. If you want a little bit more out of the subwoofer, you can turn the gain up a little bit. By setting it to 75% of the maximum volume, that way you're leaving yourself some headroom there. So if, you know, somebody else gets in your vehicle or your kid gets in there and cranks it up, that we have a little bit of safety space left so that we're not going to damage any components. So that is the settings on the Alpine amplifier. Once you're happy with these settings, you can now continue with putting the end caps on and reinstalling the rest of the components of your truck. If you opted for the kicker amplifier, here are the recommended settings and dip switch positions for your kicker 5-channel amplifier. Along the input side of the amplifier, where we have our RCAs connected, these are all of your control switches here. So we're going to go over what each one of these does and a general recommended starting. So the first one here is your fader. This is a push button, so it's either on or off. We want to push that in. We want to allow fade and balance to still work. Below that, we have an input level. This is either a low or high input. So high input would be speaker wires, a low input would be our RCAs. So in this case, we're going to have the button pushed out for low. Directly next to it, the last push button is your sub input. It's either set to amp 2 or sub. In our case, we have speakers connected to amp 1 and amp 2. So we're going to push this in for sub. This is going to tell our amplifier that we are using channels 1 through 4 for our speakers, and then the extra channel for our sub. Moving on to our dials, you can see you have amp 1, amp 2, and then your sub controls. In amp 1 and 2, you have a gain and then a crossover setting. So you have a gain for the front, you have a crossover setting for the front, gain for the rear, and a crossover setting for the rear. And then in sub, we have a gain, we have a crossover setting, and then we also have a bass boost. So let's go with amp 1 first. So your gain, that's going to be your basically your measure of loudness. That's how we're going to get power out of the amplifier per each speaker channel. The crossover setting, so you can see this one goes from off to 200 hertz. So what this is going to do is going to limit the frequencies that we're allowing to play through that channel. What we don't want to do is play sub bass or like 50 hertz through the dash speakers or the tweeters. They're not designed to do that, and that will cause damage. We don't want to hear the vocals or the words of the song coming out of the subwoofer, because the subwoofer is not designed to play those frequency ranges. So setting our crossovers is going to help limit that, and is also going to make our speakers play at their best and play the frequency ranges that they're designed for. So we have that for the front and the rear. And then on gain, on the subwoofer, again, you have a gain, you have a crossover frequencies. You can see this one goes from 50 to 200 hertz. So 50 hertz is going to be the lower end of your sub bass frequency. Generally it's about 50 to 80 to 90 hertz. So this dial goes all the way up to 200. And then the last one is our bass boost. We don't generally recommend using the bass boost. This will artificially increase the gain on the sub level. Most of the times by just adjusting the regular gain, you will definitely get the bass where you want it. So we always recommend just leaving the bass boost set to 0. So when we're setting the gains on our amplifier, what we want to do first is we want to send the amplifier the maximum amount of signal. That way that the amplifier has good power coming in, and then it can amplify it a little bit. So our general recommendation is find a song that's going to play for a few minutes on your head unit, whether it's factory, aftermarket, whatever. Turn the volume up to about 75% of that head unit's maximum volume. That way we have lots of signal coming out of the source unit into the amplifier. Then we can start adjusting the gains on our amplifier. I always start with the front. So you can use your flathead screwdriver and you can turn the dial up. Again, with gain, we're going for overall volume, your desired volume. So once you're happy with the front, you can move to the rear, and then you can also do the subwoofer. Again, you can tweak this to your own personal liking. Sometimes people like a little bit more out of the rear doors, and that's fine. You just turn up the rear gains a little bit more. You might want to dial the fronts back, a little bit more bass. Again, this is a matter of personal preference, but when it comes to the crossovers on the front crossover, we're going to set that kind of about the 12 o'clock position. Again, this goes from 0 to 200. So we want to limit the sub bass frequencies from playing out of our dash speakers. The rear, we're going to do about the same, maybe a little bit more, as generally the rear door or the hatch speakers, depending on the vehicle, are smaller and not designed to play that level of mid bass. And then on the sub crossover, we're going to, again, we're going to set that about the 11 o'clock to in the 80 to 90 hertz range. Again, that's going to limit anything above 80 to 90 hertz from playing through our subwoofer. So you can dial these in, again, to personal preference. You can make some fine-tune adjustments in the head unit, but once you're happy with all of your gains and crossovers, it's now time to start putting your truck back together. Now we have all of our connections made to the AudX amplifier with your speaker wires, your subwoofer, your power ground, and remote. We've powered the system on, checked to make sure that the amplifier is turning on. Now it's time to give it a test and also set the EQ and the gains on our new amplifier. So let's go over the control surface of the AudX amplifier. So starting here, we have the input level. This is either a high or low. We can set this to high, auto turn on. So this is a pretty cool feature in the AudX amplifier. It automatically senses when the vehicle is turned on. So we're going to set the auto turn on to the on position. So this is just another fail-safe, even though we do have a remote wire connected in this application. By turning the auto turn on to the on position, that will also ensure that the amplifier is detecting when the vehicle is on and that it should also turn on. So now we have 3 zones. You have front, rear, and sub. And we'll start with the front. So you can see the crossover here is set to either a flat or a high pass filter. We're going to set that over to HPF for high pass filter. And then below that you have another HPF or high pass filter setting. It's either a 1X or a 10X. We're going to leave that in the X1 or the 1 times setting, so that way when we get to the control dial, that is actually the numbers and we're not multiplying by 10. You can see here that we have a gain and then a HPF, or a high pass filter. So what the high pass filter does is it actually limits the lower frequencies from playing out of that certain channel. So what does that mean? We do not want the sub bass, or like the 50 to 80 hertz range, playing out of our dash speakers, because they're not designed to play sub bass frequencies. And conversely, we don't want the higher frequencies, the 10 to 20k hertz range, think of it, the words of the song, or the higher frequencies, we don't want them playing out of the subwoofer, because that speaker is not designed to play that. So what we can do is we can limit those frequencies to each channel right here on your amplifier. On the rear, you have pretty much the same setup. You have a crossover, either you have a high pass filter or a BPF or a band pass. We're going to make sure that's set to high pass, and then you also actually have a low pass filter. Again, that's going to limit the higher frequencies. You have a gain dial, and you also have a low pass filter dial, and then you have a high pass filter dial. So on the rears, we can actually limit it both ways, so that we make sure that we don't have too high or too low of frequencies playing out of our speakers, which is nice, because most of the times in the rear door or the rear hatch, depending on your vehicle, you have like a 6.5-inch speaker, maybe a component, so you may just have a 6.5-inch woofer, maybe coaxial, where you have the woofer with the tweeter. So depending on what setup you have in the rear, you can limit out either the low or the high frequencies and get the frequency range right in the area that speaker is designed to play. Next up, you have a 2 or 4 channel switch. We are going to make sure this is in 4 channel. This is going to tell the amplifier that we're using 4 full channels for our speakers. And then when we move to sub, you can see that it has a 2 channel or 5 channel option. We want to make sure that dip switch is in 5 channel. Again, this is telling the amplifier that we're using 4 channels for our speakers and then 1 channel for our subwoofer. Next is phase. Phase is the relation of how the speaker moves on the subwoofer. So a lot of times what happens is, if your door speakers are firing this way first and your subwoofer fires this way first, when the 2 speakers move, the sound waves will actually interfere with each other, and sometimes you can get like a muddied signal, or just doesn't really sound right. Maybe the bass doesn't hit, maybe the speakers don't sound right. So what phase does is, actually on the subwoofer, instead of telling it to move this way first, we can tell it to move this way first. So that way, when the speakers all start to move, instead of firing at each other, they're firing back and forth in unison, and it helps clear up that signal. So again, not always needed depending on your vehicle setup, but something you can play with to see if there's any audible difference. But again, the phase just controls the way that the subwoofer moves. You also have gain setting for the sub. You have a low pass filter. So again, low pass filter canceling out or not allowing the higher frequencies to play through. You also have a subsonic switch, and then you have the bass boost. We don't recommend using the bass boost. More times than not, you can get plenty of bass out of your subwoofer just by using the gain and appropriately setting the high pass filter or the low pass filters. So the bass boost, we just generally recommend leaving it set all the way to the left or off. So now that we've gone over all of the control features, our general recommendation for tuning the amplifier is we want to get the most amount of signal out of our source unit or our head unit. So what we're going to do is we want to find a song that plays for a few minutes continuously. We want to turn the volume on the head unit up to about 75% of its maximum volume. That way we have lots of signal coming out of the head unit and going down to the amplifier. So then the amplifier can amplify that great clean signal and get us good quality sound. And then once we have that set, then we can start with our front gains. So all we're going to do is we're going to turn the gains up. Again, we're going for overall volume. This is a personal preference. So we're going to, you can set your front gains, you can set your rear gains, again, just by turning the dial. And then you can do the subwoofer. Again, a matter of personal preference. Some customers, they like a little bit more out of their rear doors, and that's completely fine. Just adjust the rear gains up a little bit. Maybe you want a little bit less out of the front, adjust the front gains down. Again, we're going for overall volume at this point. Then we can move on to our high and low pass filters. So on our front, this goes from 50 Hertz to 500 Hertz. So we're going to adjust this. We're going to get it somewhere, maybe the 11, 12 o'clock position. For the front speakers, we're really trying to limit out 100 Hertz or below. We want to save those frequencies or eliminate those frequencies from playing out of the dash speakers in the front channel. The rear channel, we're going to do about the same, maybe a little bit higher. Again, most of the times you have a 6.5-inch speaker versus maybe a 6x9 or an 8-inch in the front door. So that 6.5 is going to play a little less mid bass or a little less of the bass frequency, so we can limit that high pass filter up a little bit. And then the last is our filter for our subwoofer. This one again is 50 to 500. So again, we're going to turn that up to about 80 to 90. Again, now we're limiting everything above that, and we're just saving the 50 to about 90 Hertz range for the subwoofer. So again, you can dial these in to personal preference. You can make some fine-tune adjustments in the head unit, but once you're satisfied with how the truck sounds, both volume and EQ wise, it's now time to replace the cover plate so that we can lock in all of our settings and nothing accidentally gets touched or twisted while it's under the seat. And now we can continue with putting the rest of our truck back together. Now that we've finished tuning our amplifier and we're now ready to put our truck back together, so we're going to start with the kick panel here. Get it lined up. Push it into place. There we are. Make sure that the little retainer back there is lined up. And you can push that little retainer top back on. Now we can grab our door sill and get that lined up. Now we have our plastics back on. All right, let's go grab our seat and we will carefully put it back in the truck and get it ready to bolt in. With our seat in, let's go ahead and lean it back and we can reconnect our two seat connections. Those will just push right into place. All right, there we are. We can put the little retainer back in. All right, there we are. Now you can line your seat up. So like I said, this customer has seat jackers. Normally you would just line up the alignment pins with the factory holes in the seat and replace the 14mm bolts. Again, recommend starting these by hand. Once those are started, we can tighten them down. Now we can slide the seat forward and move on to the rear. At this point, if you're installing the AudX amplifier, make sure that the mounting plate, the amp mounting plate, which would be sitting right here, make sure that you have your tabs under between the seat and the floor and that your holes are lined up. And then we're going to take the factory seat bolts and again start these by hand. Now we have a good amount of threads. We can tighten these down. You guys can see this Alpine and the kicker amplifier will be the same way. They are nicely tucked up under the seat. Go ahead and pop on your plastic covers. There we go. And now we're ready to put our head unit back together. Now let's go ahead and finish putting in the rest of our 4 10 millimeter screws that hold the factory or your aftermarket radio in. Grab our vent cover. Get that locked in. Now I'm going to finish up with the screen of our Alpine unit. Now our truck's completely back together. We are ready to turn this on, turn up some music, and see what our new amplifier and subwoofer really do for our Tacoma. All right, let's turn it up. Much better. All right, well, this should be no surprise, but it is a drastic and dynamic difference on what we started with at the beginning of this video. Previous to the installation, all the customer had was this Alpine ILX F511, which is a great start to an audio upgrade, but it won't do it all by itself. We were still missing that sub-bass frequency in this non-amplified Tacoma. So now the customer has a head unit, we have Alpine speakers, we have an amplifier, we have a subwoofer, we have the entire spectrum of audio. Everything is set. It is so much more powerful, more crisp. Obviously with the head unit upgrade, you have technology, but the real star of the show is this amplifier that is tucked up under the seat. This has really brought this Tacoma to life. Accompanied by our TrailGrid Pro Subwoofer Enclosure. Now we have that deep bass that we were looking for and we were missing before. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this installation video. If you're looking to pick up any of these kits, they're available in the shop now at trailgridpro.com. And like always, have a blast out there.